So tonight's meeting will be conducted on the Zoom platform and live streamed on Cohasset, but it will not be live streamed on Cohasset 143. The public may be able to participate on the Zoom platform, and there will be a link provided at the top of the agenda for the meeting. Members of this committee and other scheduled participants will be able to participate when called on by the chair. Just raise your hand. Any votes will be taken by roll call. If members of the public wish to ask questions, they need to raise their hand, and we will attempt to recognize them. If you raise your hand, you may hear me say, I see your hand is up, but the committee members will have priority. So just keep your hand up, and I will get to you. And you can also raise your physical hand and wave back and forth. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on some format as yet to be determined. Normally it would be 143, but I'm not sure if we've made the arrangements to have that happen. What I'd like to do is, because we have various people who are joining, for now, I'd like all the participants to just sign in, say your name and say here. And Jack Creighton here, Brian.
Brian Host here.
Mike.
Mike Barclay here.
Jean.
Jean Healy-Dippold here.
Mike Dick.
Mike Dick here.
Robert Hillman.
Rob Hillman here.
Craig.
Craig McClellan, school committee, present.
Yeah. Lance.
Hello, Lance Dial, school committee, present.
We have Chris Pleck. Chris, just unmute and say Chris Pleck here. No, I'm sorry, Chris Pratt.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Chris Pratt, on behalf of the Water Commission.
Okay. And Chris Pleck, I see. Chris Pleck, can you unmute and say Chris Pleck here?
I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, but I am here.
Yes, okay. Is anybody else here who has not been recognized? I
think we've got Bill McGowan. There he is.
Well, we should have Bill, but I don't see him. Bill, are you there?
Bill, you're on mute. There you are.
There he is. Okay. By the way, just for point of information, we have been told that under strict interpretations of the open meeting law, that if we can't see your face, that we're not sure you're there, even though you've said you're there. So if possible, you keep the video going. So anyway, I'd like to welcome everybody. Just so you know, this is a initiative of the select board, and it is one of our goals for the year. And I'll read the charge that the select board voted on, the other day. And by the way, thank you for Mike Dick. He's done a tremendous amount of work in the background, getting things organized and putting up that Outlook website, or I don't know what exactly that's called, Mike, but thank you, Mike. You've helped to facilitate and get us to, where we are now. So Bill McGowan and Chris Pleck have not been appointed by the select board. There were some electronic glitches with Bill. And so anyway, I expect the select board will be formalizing, that tomorrow. just a little background. What we're trying to do here is to take an initiative and formalize it to the extent that we need to operate, but without becoming so overly formal that we stifle all of the creativity that I think is going to we're going to need to do what the select board wants to do. And what I thought I would do is read the charge that was passed by the select board at the August 23rd meeting. And hold on while I find that, because I've printed out a lot of papers and things that we've done. Okay, the motion by the select board member, Jean Dipole, to charge the Cohasset Financial Planning Committee to engage in financial planning as to Cohasset's long-term capital needs, operational needs, as well as long-term debt capacity and demographic information, all of which will serve to form the basis of recommendations from the committee to the select board relating to those issues. All right. By the way, that can be added to, and one of the things is the members of this group feel that there's a way to broaden that or be more specific, they can do that. Again, we do not want procedural things to limit the ability of this committee to do, what they feel is necessary. We're tapping in to your expertise, and that would be very helpful. Oh, excuse me. So as we proceed, are there any comments about that charge? Brian?
I just had a question. I did not have the opportunity to attend the select board meeting or hear the deliberation, but I note that the charge includes the words operational needs, which to me means that it's somewhat expanded the scope of perhaps the original name of the committee, which was long-term capital planning, if I'm not mistaken. I just want to make sure I understand that that's the intent and how you sort of view the operational needs aspect of it coming into the discussion.
I would say that the answer to that the charge is deliberately broad, so the committee is not constrained.
Yeah.
And it's committee to take that and deal with it as the committee believes. We're very fortunate. I look at the quality of the people who are here and their depth of knowledge. We didn't want to constrain you. We wanted that broad. We had to have, we didn't have to, but we felt it would be better for that. Other comments?
I think too, Brian, to weigh in here, and I definitely invite Lance and Craig to provide their perspective as well, but this is not to supplant any existing committee or commission's jurisdiction. The school committee certainly has their authority and jurisdiction. Sewer commission has its. It's more about just trying to get a handle on if we can, if for example, we project based on the current trajectory that there's just going to be operational needs we're going to have to account for in tandem with capital needs. It strikes me that that is something that we should be aware of as we're looking at the whole picture. In the Hingham Sustainable Budget report that they did last year, for example, they did look at capital needs, but they were also keeping in mind the trajectory of the operating needs into the future. If they continued on that same trajectory, where would that land in light of the revenue growth that was occurring at the same time? And again, they're not, making decisions about necessarily what the town or school should or shouldn't do in FY25, but it's more about just trying to get a sense of the big picture. And consider that as we consider everything. As we move forward, including, and I think the one place maybe the charge could be amended if this group wanted to make recommendations is as it relates to revenue sources, new revenue sources. And that's definitely on the agenda, but again, there's certain revenue sources you can use for operating, certain you can use for capital, right? And so again, the idea was to sort of put the big picture on the table to help inform decisions, if that makes sense.
Other comments on the subject, or feel free to, I encourage everybody to be as wide ranging as you wish. If you get way out there, I'll probably gently encourage you to come back, but we really, as one of the members said, this is data driven. We need that data, and it's not an agenda or anybody's agenda. This is data. We need to know what people need to know to have the capital facilities to do whatever your mission is.
So one quick question from me, I think this builds on Brian's question, just to narrow it down. The successful output of this committee then is a recommendation to the select board about holistic, broad-ranging future planning financially, getting an assessment of the town's needs from the various stakeholders and getting an idea for the select board as to what the next, and I'm throwing this out there, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing 5, 10, 20-year trajectory looks like. Is that a fair assessment of what our goal is here as a committee?
Absolutely, absolutely. As we're trying to come to terms with keeping our town solvent long-term, we realize that there's things that will happen in the future. We should know what they are. And, we want to hear from all the various parts of the town, the schools, the fields, the rec, town hall, all these types of things. So we can then look at everything and understand what needs to be done. And what we want to avoid is the worst thing is the undisclosed need. We're all, this is a Cohasset-wide initiative for all parts of the community. And we really want to not hive off into various constituencies, because we all have the same interest in whatever is the town hall or the schools or the fields. So anyway, did you raise your hand, Jean?
Mike did. Mike.
Yeah, I'm only, okay, Mike, okay,
Mike Dick.
I know, okay. It's not showing on my screen. I'm only getting 3 processes. Michelle, is there a reason why we're not getting all the people on the screen?
Sure. So Jack, if you look in the right-hand corner of your screen where it says view,
Yep.
if you click that, go to gallery and you'll be able to see all of the panelists.
Well, I am in gallery. And it's only 3 squares across and 4 down.
If you go to participants at the bottom, it'll tell you everybody, both panelists of 12 and attendees of 4. If you go all the way down to the bottom, it says
Well,
participants.
on mine, it's on the top, and I can see all the participants. And for whatever reason, there's Mike. So I don't know why I'm not seeing Mike on that. And I'm particularly sensitive because we had a meeting before. There you are, Mike. You appeared up over there as I moved my things around, where Mike raised his hand and then lowered it later on. And I was looking for him and well, whatever. So yes, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, my hand has been raised and has stayed raised. I haven't lowered it. So not sure what you meant there. Um,
I was just talking, but never mind, but
okay.
I
Several
can
weeks
see-
ago when we got started, we put together an overview, which I've put together again for the benefit of Chris Pratt, Chris Plex, Bill McGowan, and Lance Dial, and anyone else new on our viewers. Our intent for those people who are viewing is to engage with the viewers who may not be on this committee, but we want to hear from you as well. It's very important to have a free flow of ideas. Jack, if I can take 2 minutes to walk through this 4-slide presentation, I think it will help level set for everyone our overview, our need, and our purpose and philosophy, at least as it was outlined through the summer.
Right. I think that's a good idea. And I want to reiterate anybody who's watching, the reason that we are on Zoom as opposed to a meeting in one of the town buildings is that we want as many people as possible to be able to see this. And in the future, we may have some in-person meetings, but we really want people to across the community. So that was a good point, Mike. So anyway, go ahead with your slides, please.
Okay, I'm going to share a screen. Hopefully you can all see that. So we hold a AAA bond rating, which we're all very proud of. Our financial future holds several multi-million-dollar capital projects of different kinds. Some are in development, some are simply proposed. But Advisory Committee and Capital Budget recognized last year that we've got some biggies coming. We need to get ahead of that. The projects are certainly going to put pressure on our town's credit worthiness as we find ways to pay for the projects. This working group is a forum for conversations and discussions on Cohasset's complex financial future. In my view, and I hope the rest of the committee shares it, we're not looking to vote up or down on projects. What we're trying to do is see what do we have in front of us as far as projects, as far as debt limits, as far as how we're conducting our fiscal management of the town. So that's what we're after. The working group is comprised of parties who are stakeholders, and definition, in my experience, of a stakeholder is anybody affected by the outcome of a complex situation. And last but certainly not least, we represent the interests of Cohasset citizens, its taxpayers, and certainly water and sewer ratepayers. So the need, we have newer upgraded purpose-built buildings proposed for the future. And we also have, and this is something that's come out of capital budget and supported by advisory in the past anyway, we have a critical need for annual maintenance and upkeep for our existing infrastructure. And I'll just say a brief word there. Maintenance avoids the need for building new buildings if we keep after it. And a little editorial comment I'll make. I think the town has not done a good enough job in building in maintenance costs into its operational budget. So I'll leave it at that. We do have a need to review our existing operational funding formulas and make changes to meet new realities. I think this point might have caused some concern in some quarters. Everything in our minds, in the original working group, in our minds, everything is on the table to look at. If we've got funding formulas that are working, great. If we've got funding formulas that are constrained by old agreements or old rules or old approaches, then it's worth looking at them and seeing what our options are, whether to change them or leave them alone, but at least examine them and see if they're still relevant. Our need certainly is to maintain its AAA bond rating indefinitely. And our need is to find ways to pay for the projects and maintenance within our financial limits. And then finally, our purpose and philosophy. This is a proposed mission statement, and we are somewhat informal. We're not looking to, publish a mission statement unless people want to, but This is really our guidelines that this working group is working from. So we want to provide the town with the tools and methods to reliably and consistently gauge our proposals, whether they're generational, and we sort of chose that word as something that means a 30-year lifespan for a capital outlay. And then our 5-year and 10-year plans and forecasts with their funding formulas. Whoops, sorry about that. What did I just do? Now my computer has, okay. One more try. For those of you with Apple computers, they often take over. There are robot overloads here. Oh, come on. Okay, sorry. Anyway, we want to prepare the ground for the select board and the town manager's office, the town manager especially, to assess and prepare major financial warrant articles. We're here to help them so that when we bring these warrant articles to town meeting, we as a group, as stakeholders, have really tried to think through all the constraints, all the needs, and come to consensus on helping to craft a warrant article that can pass, that will be successful. And not only that, if it comes to bonding and any kind of vote to support bonding, that there's a greater chance of acceptance on the part of the voters to take on the debt in an election. So we're looking to create a stakeholder-derived, consensus-based funding model based on need, based on cost, and financial feasibility. And there is no intent to either carve out or promote any particular project. We're trying to be agnostic here, and we're going back to fact-based decision-making. Our philosophy could include the following principles. Members contribute and are really, I should also add, encouraged to contribute their information, their thoughts, their ideas, and this is important, in open, honest discussion. And we will look for areas of common interest first to get to consensus. We will look at our current financial fiscal policies, I should say, fiscal policies and formulas, see if they work as intended and are still useful. And we hope we can move fast, we can stay focused on goals and seek consensus. So thanks, Jack, for that. And I will I'll go back to mute and listen in.
Okay. Yeah, and if we could, just for this, I'd like to be able to see everybody. So I when they raise their hands, I can see that. And if anybody sees somebody with a hand raised that I haven't seen, let me know. But I want to reiterate one of the points that Mike said, which is this is not intended, and nor will it be successful, becomes a forum to argue over various proposals, constituencies, or whatever. We will look at what are the expressed needs of the various stakeholders in the town government and the citizens, and we will attempt to figure out what is the needs and what it will cost. And so that can be presented to the select board and ultimately to the town, so the town can make their decisions which way they want to go based upon accurate information and based upon accurate across the board information, so we can fairly and realistically weigh the alternatives. And so this committee just has to come up with the facts. The unpleasant slicing and dicing will fall to the select board. So anyway, comments from everybody.
Jack, it's Chris Plex. First, I apologize that Zoom hasn't given me the opportunity to go on camera, but I wanted to ask whether or not there's been a forecast of future capital and budget needs and how that would stack up against projected future revenues, or is that something that's coming?
That's something we want to get from this committee. And I really want to go to everybody here. And I really would like to ask people to give their input so far, one by one if you can, because we need we need what you think. So, Rob, do you have some comments?
Brian Host has his hand up.
Nope. Okay, Brian?
Yeah, I just wanted to address Chris's question. Chris, there is a 10-year capital plan. It's been posted to the folder of files for this group in the Cohasset drives. I would just encourage you to do two things. First of all, click through it and get familiar with it. It's basically a sheet for each one of the departments. And you're going to see year after year of columns and line after line of capital requests. I would encourage you to recognize that this is a list of potential requests. It's not a list of formal requests. And to answer your question as to how that compares to available funding, you're going to see in multiple years that the totals add up to numbers much greater than the roughly $2 million per year that is appropriated to capital budget as it stands right now. So that's part of the challenge. And I think everyone will see this in the context of the discussion. Part of it is how do we increase revenues so that we can actually fund some of these things. And then the other challenge is how do you actually time these items so that we can make them happen within the context of our AAA rating. Because if they were all to happen simultaneously, it would be definitely beyond our credit metrics. So I would encourage everyone to go, click through that. And if it's helpful, we can spend a little bit of time, perhaps on our next meeting, making that an agenda item so that people can see sort of where these items sit in that capital request forecast.
Any comment from I see we have two, we have the Sewer Commission and Water Commission, and we have two people from the schools. So either Lance or Craig, do you have some things you'd like to bring forth?
Jack, I can jump in, but I guess, are you asking for specific examples of funding needs over the next 10 to 15 years? Or are you because I'm actually, just to be frank, still a little fuzzy on our goal. What I heard from Gene and what we talked about in the beginning was, we're kind of a forum for coming up with the town needs. Then Jack, you said the slicing and dicing would come to the select board. But then when I see Mike's presentation, it looks like we're doing a lot more of that decision making. And even though we're not selecting projects, it seems like we're having a higher role in coming up with funding solutions. I guess I still am trying to figure out what our role is. What's the output of this committee that the select board is looking for, or what do we agree on is the output of this committee?
I would say very simply, if we do want to find out what your capital needs are.
Okay, and right now.
No, you don't have to do it now, but down the line.
I mean, I can give you directional, of course, but I'm just trying to figure out where we are in the scope of things.
We're establishing the scope, Gene.
Okay.
So I think Brian summarized it well in terms of our need to identify the needs. And to Mike's point, I do think that if there's a recommendation the committee wants to make, then we'll take that under, the select board will take that under advisement, because the select board sets the financial policies and tries to move them forward. But I think the bigger focus of the committee also is, in addition to addressing what I think is probably a well-known capital need, really, I think Brian summarized what I hope as a select board member is the output from this committee, which are recommendations, including as to new revenue sources that will help us manage all of these needs that we know we're grappling with. That let's put them all on the table and then see if how the different revenue sources may come into play, and the timing issue, because we don't want to have a bunch of big needs colliding at once that are precluding either from happening, because it's putting into question our AAA rating. So I think a part of that data gathering is to try to figure out again, timing from just a data-driven standpoint. So it's getting the data and information, analyzing it, and then recommendations as it relates to new potential revenue sources to, responsibly handle these different needs that might be out there. And that's why we have new revenue sources as one of the agenda items that I hope we get to, as well as just a readout of, research that I know different members have been doing over the intervening time period. And so I think too, we do have Bill, for example, who is joining us from the Sewer Commission, and it would be great to hear from his perspective, anything he thinks is sort of on the table in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's right now we're in the data gathering phase, I think. But ultimate output, I think it would be great to get that information, and that information collected in a relatively succinct report too, for public consumption, to Mike Dick's point about how we want to make sure people are educated and informed about decisions they're making, et cetera. I see Brian's hand up.
Perhaps I never lowered it. I apologize.
Oh, okay.
Well, Bill, we'll put you on the spot.
That's okay. That's why I came. So we're in a little bit of a, I guess maybe a little bit different. We have, I'm trying to think. It's gone by so slowly in my 10 or 12 years on the sewer board. I think that we have never gone, in fact, I'm sure we've never gone before the town to ask for money. We eat what we kill. And we have in our capital plan that I shared with Mike, as well as the regional sewer plan, we fund through our ratepayers funding of us, we fund capital items. And to date, we have been funding membranes replacement, which will be about $2 million, $2.5 million, which will probably occur in about 8 years. We have funded garage door replacement, which took us 4 years to find a vendor. A grit screw and a sludge thickener, but don't ask me what they are. So we have funded all these things through our ratepayers and the receivables that we get as running a business, which is sewer. We don't have any major capital requirements at the moment, unless we decide to do some sort of separate plant. We have a satellite plant. We have talked about this off and on. We just don't have a place to put it at the moment. There were plans to put it down off of Forest. We've looked at perhaps off of Beechwood. We've looked at groundwater discharge permits. For us to go for an outfall pipe to such as Hull and increase the capacity of the plant would be untenable, in my opinion. Create a tremendous amount of disruption to the town. So we're looking at sort of status quo, and then utilizing Hull as our sort of excess capacity until we decide what we're going to do for a satellite plant. So right now we don't have any major things coming up. Jack, I'm happy to talk, as much as I know about the regional as you want, if you want me to apprise the board of this, or.
Well, I think I don't think we want to go in an in-depth discussion of that at this particular forum, but I think it may come up, especially if you're going to have to come to the town for money for that. But I'm hearing that you're in good shape. Chris Pratt, anything in water that you guys are seeing?
Sure. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this committee, and I'm new to the Water Commission. Been on since May, but this will be a part of the town that does require a lot of resources going forward in capital investment. An aging plant should be a discussion, in the coming years, and it's certainly going to compete with other big investments in town, and with a small customer base. in town in terms of the ratepayers. We have to make the dollar stretch to maintain and improve and upgrade, relatively complicated utility system. So it's great that the water department, water commission can be part of this conversation.
I think what we'd be looking at is you're a self-governing economic entity to yourself, and you can pay your own bills, but if you do go for funding, it does impact the town's borrowing or bond rating.
Yes.
Okay.
So
So
as an enterprise fund, we do have the ability to have a revenue source, but certainly it's a challenge every year to budget for increasing costs, required upgrades and repairs, and ultimately it's a small customer base so all those costs have to be spread apart, spread across not even the entire town, because some of the town is on the Hingham side. So there are future upgrades needed.
okay, let me bring up one of the things that we are aware of is the state looking at our schools, basically the middle school. So, either Craig or Lance, do you want to give us an update of where we are in the new middle school, high school, and that project?
Greg,
Chairman,
you want to,
that?
yeah, you want to take the lead on that as the facilities person?
Sure. So as I think probably most people on this committee are aware, we submitted a statement of interest to participate in what's called the MSBA's core program for the upcoming year. That core program focuses on major either rehabilitation or replacement projects for educational facilities within municipalities throughout Massachusetts. We have sort of been notified that we're in the next phase of that right now. We have not been invited to participate in the, so in other words, our application has not necessarily been accepted, but they are continuing their due diligence with regards to town of Cohasset in the form of what's called a senior study, where an on-site visit from the MSBA and numerous other town representatives will be participating in that process, some of whom are on this committee. The MSBA surveys and evaluates the current facilities and compares that to the needs of modern educational facility, and I think incorporates those findings into their overall decision. But it is a positive development for sure. Obviously, those efforts would not probably happen if they weren't continuing to consider Cohasset's application. So that process, the application process or decision process continues throughout the rest of this year. And we don't anticipate hearing one way or the other before, late December or early 2023. By early, I mean January, February. So that's where we are. The senior study takes place on September 27th, I believe. I can just check and make sure that's the date. But like I said, many of you are invited as certain elected officials, but yeah, it's on the 28th this year. This month, September 28th. That's when it's happening. And in terms of those more specific requests from the schools, separate aside from that that building project, Mr. Creedon, that you referred to. I know that Pat Sullivan, the superintendent of schools, is meeting with his leadership team later this month as well to start to develop sort of 3-year sort of wish lists in terms of operational and teaching and learning and facilities requests. So more long-term. So we'll have more information to you.
So as I understand it, the big question is it's middle school and high school. And the question will be whether the recommendation is to completely rebuild or to remodel. And does the town have some leeway on which way to go on that?
Sure. I mean, it's just so right now, the only thing that's being considered is whether or not we're invited to participate in the program, which is basically a subsidization of the overall project. So like a percentage of the total cost of a new school gets subsidized by the, for lack of a better phrase, by the MSBA. So that's what they're considering right now. But the question of what we do is, you know, certainly the MSBA will likely come to a conclusion or develop an opinion as to that. Our you know, design professionals that we've engaged thus far in our early explorative efforts have opined that, you know, the facility, that particular facility is the one that's in need of major renovation and or replacement, which is why we submitted the statement of interest to the MSBA. But this is a very much a town-wide community decision. This is not something that is done in a vacuum. So, I mean, we're far from deciding anything. I mean, this would be a something that's advertised, you know, a lot before it's then comes before the entire town and some sort of town meeting. But this is just the early sort of gestation phases of this, and obviously, you know, I don't know that obviously we'd want that subsidy if we're actually going to consider that, right? We don't want to forego millions of dollars. So that's why we're talking about the MSBA to see if, you know, there's an appetite to give Cohasset some money towards such a project, if we were to undergo such a major, you know, rehabilitation project or reconstruction project. But we're not, like, no one's deciding. I mean, everyone's going to have to say, the entire community, it impacts everyone.
Well, we're just looking for data and information. We're not weighing in on the projects, and this is not a forum. But if there are things that are happening and there are needs, then the town, because, you know, even though the school is separate, we are one town. So we want to know, and they are our Cohasset schools. So that's why what we want to know is if we're going to have to do something, what are our options? And you're to be commended for looking for the sources. Mike Barclay.
Hey, Craig, thanks. Mike Barclay from Advisory. Having been involved with the East School project in Hingham pretty intimately when that was done, coming out of the gates with this new MSBA program, if I remember correctly, there was a little bit of an element that we were on their timeline. And so I guess January, February is not that far off. And so I guess what's sort of the decision matrix that happens in January, February? Like, do they say, yes, you're in, and here's your percentage, or yes, you're in, and then, okay, now we got to figure out what the percentage is? I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of, you know, when we have to ultimately act as a town, you know, when that may happen so that we can be as best prepared as possible.
Mike, thanks for the question. And I want to preface my comments with the statement that this is my foray into new school development. So I'm not going to purport to be an expert on MSBA processes. But what I will say is that from what I've learned thus far, it's more in line with the latter statement that you just made, in that they decide whether we are a town that they're interested in making the commitment to. And then the next step would be a feasibility study, like a full feasibility study, where all kinds of planning considerations are explored in depth. And it wouldn't be, I believe that the timeline, now look, it was presented to us some time ago by the design professionals that we engaged to do like the existing condition study of all the schools to decide whether or not we should even submit an SOI to the MSBA. They had introduced us to that timeline, and from what I recall, I don't think that the actual budget item request to the town would be presented for, I honestly think that it might even be a 2024 question. So it's still pretty far off. And that's why you'll see this it'll be a major PR campaign, for lack of a better phrase. I don't know what you want to call it, so that everyone's aware of any considerations that are going to be on the table. And everyone has a full opportunity to voice opinions. But, you know, there's a slide out there that I will try and get you, if you can email me and just remind me, offline. That sort of outlines it gives like the chronology of the steps in the process. It's pretty helpful. So hopefully that answers your question, at least to some initial degree.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, thank you. And so I guess they vote whether we're in the program, then there's a feasibility study to determine whether it's a reno or a new build. And then once that's completed, the feasibility study, then you start talking about the numbers of what either one of those options will be, depending on what it's their recommendation though, right? I mean, that's at the end of the day, we have to take their recommendation ultimately to get their funding, if I remember correctly.
Something like that. But it's a more of a collaborative process. It's not, but what isn't necessarily collaborative is the percentage that is eligible for their subsidy, and of that percentage, which percent they're going to.
Yep. Yeah, and then there are like green credits and stuff like that. Yeah, no, okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
So Brian, bonding, how would we fund this?
Well, actually, before we go to that, two quick questions, just up back to timing. First on feasibility, the feasibility study. So if they were to come back and say, you're in, next step is a feasibility study. It sounds like, Craig, that may be a fiscal 24 event. In other words, it would not be for the cycle this spring. Did I hear that accurately, or is there a possibility it is this spring?
No, I think that the feasibility study will be sooner. The item I was talking about, Brian,
Yeah.
is the big ask. So
Okay.
once the feasibility study, so that's going to be a 24 item. But I think the feasibility study, which you're correct in identifying as, it will be a significant expense. It's not cheap. That will be sooner than that. I again, and I don't want to talk at a turn because I don't have this fresh in my mind. It was months ago that this, I can email the entire committee the slide just so they can see it's helpful.
Okay.
But I can also relay any specific questions to our design professionals that did the existing condition survey study. And the reason I say that is because this is what they do, right? They design and build schools so that they're very well versed in the process. So I can always, and all of us have questions at this point because it's been so long since we've done something like that, or even I should say considered something like that here.
Okay, so that would be helpful. I mean, the question is, what is the scale of the cost of the feasibility study, and what is the timing? Because it's definitely not in the capital plan, and unless you're talking, a few $100,000, then it requires a significant amount of thought in terms of how to get it done.
I agree. I'll email the architect right now and see if I can't get an answer in the short term to those answer questions. Who knows? He's pretty responsive, but if not, then in the short term, I'll get back to you.
Okay. That was the first question. The second question, I know we've applied to participate in a replace or major renovation program. But as you probably call, this capital budget deliberated around funding the condition study last year. We were also, I think, very focused on the fact that at least at a bare minimum, that work would enable us to identify the key maintenance requirements, even if we were to be rejected by the MSBA. And I guess my question is, if they're not going to, if they choose not to take us for a replacement or a renovation, I do understand the MSBA has other programs for accelerated roof replacements, windows, things of that nature. Would they automatically default us into those types of things, or is that a totally separate process?
It's a separate process.
Totally separate.
Yes.
Okay. But at a bare minimum, having them come out and see our building, they'd at least be familiar with, our 3 acres of flat rubber roof.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. And Jack, your question, how would we bond this? I mean, it depends.
Well, I just thought it would be helpful to give a kind of an overview of what the process would look like. And part of that is for this committee, and part of that is for people who might be watching this from the community at large.
It's probably too early for me to answer that.
Okay,
But I can, conceptually tell you, it will start with a pro forma analysis as to whether or not the town's financial metrics can support bonding of the scale contemplated and still maintain its AAA rating. That will be the starting point for the discussion. If the answer to that is no, then we have to collectively understand, what it means to drop down below a AAA rating. And I don't want to go too far down this path, because I think we do need to have a thorough discussion on ratings, but there are a handful of people on this call that are familiar with this issue. Oftentimes people will say, well, it doesn't really cost us much more in terms of our bonding costs to drop down, from AAA to AA plus or even AA. And, when the market is phenomenally efficient, and that may be true. But, the market, does come unglued at times. And, there have been times in very recent history when if you didn't have a AAA rating, you couldn't access the market at any price. And so that's the real cost, much more so than, perhaps a little bit of incremental, coupon on our borrowing. So I think we really need to do that analysis. We need to understand the impact, and whatever compromise comes with it if we choose to proceed.
well, I think that suggests one short-term goal, which is number one, to understand the consequences, and are we comfortable with a policy that says we really want to, that we need to maintain our AAA. And I'm familiar with why that, but maybe that's something that this committee can say, hey, we looked at that, and that is guiding principle number one.
Mhm.
What is people in the community, is there discussion about that particular issue?
Well, I guess I'd just say right now it is the guiding principle. So to the extent you want to unwind it, it's a change from status quo. I mean, there's everything I've heard in recent history since targeting that AAA was we get it in place, we keep it in place.
Right. Jane?
I was just gonna say, I know Lance has had his hand up for.
Oh, I'm sorry.
quite a
Well, thank
while,
you,
so I wasn't
Lance.
sure.
Yeah, and no worries. I was I was just going to add in that, and Craig alluded to this, the school building is obviously the big area where we need some significant investment. But Craig mentioned that Dr. Sullivan is looking into other areas where our schools are below peers, and there will be some reasonably sized investment that we'd need to bring the schools up as far as performance and offerings and other things. And that's materials we can finalize and come at a later time. I could give you a high level overview now, but it's probably better to wait until we have that, till he's had the meetings with his leadership team and we have actual hard data and numbers to support what those asks would look like.
Jane?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I know that Brian and Mike went out and did some research, and so did Mike. And one of the things that I talked with Lance and Craig about was also trying to get some more data from the schools in terms of their general future projections. So I appreciate that. I was asking for that during the first week of school, which is a tricky ask for them. But I might suggest after we finish this round of conversations, move to the information that Mike Dick, Mike Barclay, and Brian and Rob were gathering following the last meeting we had.
You mean right now?
Oh, well, I think once Brian and Mike are finished with.
Okay.
our
I-
comment.
Yeah,
Brian.
Jack and Gene, thanks. I would just jump in and just maybe gently remind folks that, we are a AAA rated town, and the rating agencies and the investors that buy our debt expect us to invest in the future. And I think Mike Dick used the right word in terms of looking at the enormity of the task before us in being agnostic and understanding what all the needs were, because it's then, you can then finance it, or you have to figure out ways to finance it, but it could require some creativity, and whether for certain projects there's public-private partnerships, things like that. That's, I mean, my understanding, that's kind of the scope of what we're trying to get at on this with this working group here is to figure out the enormity of the need. And then on the other side of the ledger, say, okay, how do we then think about financing that? And again, beyond just issuing general obligation bonds, how do we get creative? And, and I don't know a lot about it, but like, for instance, the Inflation Reduction Act has something like 350 billion of money set aside for smart green buildings for municipalities and things like that. And so there's other ways to think about funding besides just issuing debt. And that would be my hope, is that when we can identify all the needs of the town, that we can then also, have a lens on all the different ways that we can think about financing it. Because again, back to the AAA, there's an expectation that we're gonna invest for the future, and that we'll have a good, solid plan to do so. And not that it has to be all done right now, today or tomorrow, but that there's a plan in place.
Okay. Other comments along that same line of thought?
I think Brian has his hand
Brian?
I've got to get in the practice of taking it. I apologize.
up.
That's all right.
Sorry, Brian.
I think Mike's comments were very succinct and to the point. And I see Jean raised her hand, so.
I was looking for it on our new website. I can't find it unfortunately anymore, but I do believe that our financial policy that the Board of Selectmen and town meeting adopted requires us to maintain a AAA rating. So
Okay.
I don't think there's much debate necessarily.
Yeah, does anybody oppose that? Okay.
Well, I guess, Jack, I did like the idea Brian put forward of understanding the consequences of it. Because we may be, I mean, given the magnitude of some of the needs that I understand we have, we may need to have a discussion about what's more important, maintaining that rating or sacrificing some of these projects. And I think that in the spirit of everything being on the table, I'd like to just understand and have that data to be able to give the appropriate recommendation.
Okay, so what you would say is there may come a time when the need is so acute that we would sacrifice the AAA rating?
I think that we should consider, I think everything should be considered. I mean, and hopefully, if we have enough borrowing capacity to stay into AAA, then this isn't an issue. But I do think it is a decision point for the select board that we could accomplish all these needs at one of the costs would be going down to a AA plus or a AA rating, and decide whether or not the select board wants to do that. Now, I'm not saying I'm in for or against it. I don't know. But it is a decision that could be made, and I wouldn't want to arbitrarily hold our hands back for funding sources just because we have made a decision in the past. It's worth understanding the consequences of that, and we know it would come with a price, and the price could be failure to be able to access credit markets in down times. Maybe that makes it totally unappealing. Then we know that, but we've at least considered it.
Okay. Good. I mean, that's what we want. This is what this forum is meant to do, to get that information out. And somebody says, yeah, we need to think about that, whether we do it or not. But that's good. Any other thoughts on that? Other perspectives? Mike?
Yeah, thanks. One other major dimension that needs to be raised at this point, and that is the willingness of the taxpayers and the ratepayers to go for the increases, whatever they happen to be. So it's one thing to have a government committee, government organized committee say, you know what, we think it's okay to go down to a lower bond rating. The voters may disagree. The voters may feel that with what they're paying, not only in taxes, but also in water fees and sewer fees, that a family budget has been stretched to a point that the voter is not willing to go beyond. That dimension is almost unknowable. It's a mystery as to what the town will accept, and how we can get after that knowledge. I don't know right now, but that might be something for this group to consider, is how can we assess the town's willingness? And now I'm thinking off the top of my head, straw polls, some way to gauge sentiment ahead of a town vote, well ahead of a town vote, might be warranted at this point. That's another, the willingness of the town's citizens to pay for major projects over and above the tax rate. It needs to be somehow, I'll use the term quantified, so that it can help us make decisions. Obviously, we're not going to put something forward that people are going to say, nope, we're not going to vote for it.
Jane,
Rob has his hand up before me.
Rob,
Just three things. I don't want to take up too much time, but one thing that Mike just alluded to, but these decisions are not ultimately going to be made by the select board. They're ultimately going to be made by town meeting, and town meeting is to some extent a black box. Somebody has a way of confidently predicting what town meeting and or a subsequent vote at the polls would be. I'd be interested to know. And that's hard. It makes the whole process difficult. It requires consensus and careful, accurate messaging to help people make good decisions as they view them. The other one is I've heard things. I don't know if it was Craig or Lance talked about significant additional non-operational asks from the school department. And the water department talked about, or was it sewer? I don't recall. I think it was water. Talked about substantial projects coming up. Those are precisely the kinds of things that, in order to do what this committee seems to be charged to do, we need to get, as we've been saying, on the table. Surprises aren't going to help, because at the end, my last point is this is all subject to math. We develop a cost accounting style matrix to put this stuff into, and you put in variables, and you put in the tax base, and you put in the average taxpayer's burden, and numbers will come out the other side. And that will loop right back to my first point. What are people going to be thinking when they attend town meeting? If it is. So I think part of the process has to involve making sure that every one of these either capital spending committees appropriately, or capital looking after committees like capital budget and advisory are careful to make sure that everything is there. And then one last point is that although we're not necessarily charged with operations, operations remains the biggest thing. And the capital budget and capital expenditures suppose at least generally a level funding to the town. And if we're talking about trade-offs, which as Lance mentioned moments ago, if capital expenditures go up and they affect our ability to fund operations, which means mostly wages, then are we talking about reducing levels of service to service capital needs, which is probably also not a great, not an idea that's likely to be viewed as good. I'm not going to express a personal opinion. That's all I had. I think those things are all in play. I think they may be implicit in what most other people said, but I just want to make sure they're all said out loud.
That's a very good point. And we should also remember history doesn't repeat itself, but it suggests the turn down of the town hall. And if we go back further in history, a number of overrides that were predicted to pass and failed significantly. And so that is something that we should definitely, thank you, Rob. Jane? You're
I was
muted.
just saying Brian had his hand up first. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If it's a real hand, Brian.
It is a real hand. I got it
Could
right this
people do
time.
me
And
a favor? Because
I'll try to remember to take it down this time. Maybe I'll get it right.
Wave your hand in the center of the screen so I don't miss anybody, please.
Okay. I just wanted to add just sort of one important point. It seems like a nuance, but it's not. For larger projects where you're fundamentally dealing with excluded debt, they are actually not decided at town meeting. They're decided at the ballot box. And so I think it's really important on these larger projects to, sort of step out of the bunker from time to time, pinch yourself and ask yourself, are the 7,000 residents of this town going to look at this and say, this is a good, this project makes sense and it makes sense at this price, and I'm willing to cast a vote to support it? Because, when it comes to taxes, people will take 5 minutes to show up at town hall and cast a ballot. They may not take a whole lot more than that to evaluate the project. So it's just really, really important to keep a sanity check on this, particularly early on when we're racking up significant costs on, architectural designs and things of that nature, which all become, fodder for the shredder if the project doesn't go forward. So and it's not directed at any particular project. It's just anything that's large enough to require excluded debt. Ultimately, the taxpayers will decide, and it will not be a town meeting, which is sadly fairly easy to stack.
Jane?
So I just wanted to go back to Mike's point about how to assess voter willingness. And I don't think that what I'm about to suggest talks about voter willingness, but it does talk about how we benchmark and square up against other communities, including peer communities. There's a lot of information on the Department of Revenue's website looking at tax rates and how we compare against neighboring towns or peer communities. We might not be a peer against Hingham, for example, but it is a neighboring community. And if you look at that Hingham Sustainable Budget report that we sent around earlier, you'll see they have a ton of benchmark data in there, including as it relates to Cohasset, because they did include Cohasset in their lists. And that's everything from the income of the residents to the value of the parcels to the tax rates. We have a higher tax rate, for example, than Hingham because we don't have as much of a commercial base. And so when the select board charged demographics as a part of the charge, frankly, that's a part of what we were trying to get a sense of with respect to how we square up against other communities from a data standpoint. And that is data that we can pull from the Department of Revenue to say, hey, actually, our tax rate's already pretty high, or maybe it's not. And so that's one place that we can look to get data. Now, the data won't necessarily reveal the willingness, but it will show at least some data for us to think about as we go forward. And I think to Mike Barclay's point too, I think a part of the hope, at least speaking for myself, is that when we're talking about how to fund some of these projects, we do use this forum as an opportunity to combine our intellect and talent to really think outside the box to see if there's some creative funding solutions or things that we should be pursuing more aggressively in order to help meet some of the sort of long-term deferred needs that we have.
Thank you, Jane. Lance?
To that end, I do like the idea of kind of more creative funding. Has the town ever considered engaging a kind of consultant of types who knows how to navigate federal aid, state aid, all the various grants and sources of funding that are available, especially now with the Inflation Reduction Act and there's various billions that are there. There's still legacy money out there from the COVID bills. So I'm just curious if that's something that has been looked at, or if that's something that should go as a suggestion from this group as well.
In answer to that question, that we do have a member of the town staff who's been charged with keeping track of grants. And that's something that we'll check with Chris Senior as to status of that, but that's a very good idea.
Yeah, well, just to put a finer point on it, it's more than just monitoring. I mean, it's literally someone with experience on who to talk to, how these things get granted. We heard from Mike, who seems like a great resource, as he's been involved in the East School project in Hingham. So he's going to be coming. The school committee is going to come into him for advice on how that worked out. But people who've done this, who've hunted down, figured out how to reinterpret statutes. Yeah, I'm sure there's a cottage industry of consultants out there who do that sort of thing, and it may be worth looking into, because that may be a way to tap into some untold billions of dollars for our town.
Yeah, well, Mike has his hand up, but I just want to answer, that person's job is also to seek out grants. It's not just to monitor, but to keep on top of that. I'm not sure. I think that is a good point, but Mike Dick.
Yes, we also have individuals who are promoting different benefits to the town through federal programs. And I'm thinking specifically of Tanya Bodell and the work that she's been doing with the Alternative Energy Committee. She is very wired into grants, and she has made several proposals at different times for using solar arrays or battery support under federal and state grants. In addition, FEMA and MEMA are connected into our Cohasset Emergency Management Group, and I'm working with them to pursue grants as well. So there are, I'll call it centers of excellence or specialty around Town Hall that are focused. But what it will take, it will take more cross-pollinization. And I think this group could certainly help support that. One example that Tanya gives is that the schools could benefit from solar arrays and save the town a lot of money. So there's that cross-pollinization that could take place, just as a off-the-shelf example that I happen to be aware of. And I'm sure there are other opportunities of a similar nature where one group might know of something and need to connect with another group to say, if we partner on these initiatives, we can realize some additional revenue. I think my hand's down.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea, and I think we should certainly be looking, and I'm very familiar with what Tanya's been doing. She's relentless. She's very good. Anyway, so we have a little positive thing. Jean, are you raising your hand or?
No, I wasn't. Sorry, I was just scratching my head, but I might recommend that Mike and Brian and Mike and Rob, I think, if they're willing and able, provide the readout on the work that I know they've been gathering information on over the last few weeks.
Rob?
Yeah, it's like the group project that has to give its report. It gets called on first by the teacher. I think it's fair to say that we raised more questions than we have answers. And there are 3 people on that group, 2 of whom have a sophisticated grasp of municipal and bond financing generally, and one of them is a labor lawyer. So I may invite one of my colleagues to weigh in and talk a little specifically about some of the things that we've asked for and very recently have received in terms of kind of how to structure this analysis. I mean, it's kind of a blunt instrument to say, what is the debt load of the town? The debt load of the town is different from the pain point of the debt load of the town. People are willing to lend us gigantic amounts of money, but they're are very good reasons not to go there, some of which have been discussed on this. So there were on this call and some of which are sort of implicit, but Brian, you had asked for some specifics and I saw them coming in over the weekend. Did you have anything to expand on my, oh my gosh, I'm not ready to give my report response to Gene's question?
I'm happy to handle the hot potato for at least a moment. So we, as Rob mentioned, we certainly have pursued this. I think in the process, we've unfortunately learned that our prior finance director really is not readily available to us at this point in time. That's the bad news. The good news is we have a new finance director that has been hired and is joining us on October 1st. So we're not that far away from actually having an engine under the hood in terms of running these financial analyses. I think we can certainly do it independently, but it's a lot better if it's done internally by the town with our input and our guidance. But to make a long story short, we have now gathered the existing bond schedules, at least as of 2021. There are some pretty significant updates since then, as I understand it. So we need fundamentally those schedules to all be updated before we're actually working with current information. And in terms of the question of debt ceiling, the debt ceiling fundamentally is driven by two things. One is the AAA rating threshold. Okay, our town has certain financial metrics. You plug it into a ratings model, and you can determine with a reasonable degree of accuracy sort of where you're going to start to run into trouble with the rating agencies. So that's one threshold. The other is the willingness of the town to actually support the increase in tax rate to support new bonds, which is hypothetically unlimited, but as a practical matter is not, right? So I think it's really important early on in this process that people start thinking about how much tax do we actually think our constituents are willing to sign on for our various combination of projects, plural, and think about it in that context. And then the exercise really becomes, okay, how do you size these in terms of scope, and then time them so that they can be effectively digested by the town's financial wherewithal over a period of time without creating sort of a traffic jam that that overextends our AAA rating and otherwise causes financial pressures that that will have some weird effects if we go that route. So that at the highest level are the two constraints: the AAA rating and our own willingness to tax ourselves. At a little, at a much smaller scale, I mean, it's fairly easy to figure out, if you just want to maintain level taxes, which I don't think is realistic in the context of the scale of some of these projects. But you can look at the in-levy debt roll-off. We need the new debt schedules to do that. You can look at the excluded debt roll-off schedules and make a decision whether or not you want to maintain sort of level excluded debt, so the tax bills aren't bouncing around and or dropping, if one were to choose. But those aren't going to get to the scale of capacity to address the projects that are in front of us. I'll just cut to the chase. So that's the backdrop. The rating agency model, as I suspected, their request list to the town is fairly simple and focused on quality of management, but their model itself is actually quite sophisticated, and it has the type of rigorous credit analysis that you'd expect. I mean, everything from general obligations to contingent liabilities, which includes our enterprise funds, which is partially why we have Chris and Bill on the phone. That all gets caught up in our credit rating and our ability to to borrow at the geo level. So it is all related. My suggestion is that once we get Jennifer on board, that we work through this exercise with her. We should pull in our financial advisor to get their views on how the rating agencies will react to our series of projects. And with that insight, quite honestly, we should then approach the rating agencies and socialize this with them. One thing that, my experience is not in municipal finance, but it's in corporate. And, it's the same rating agencies, different analysts. But they like to know what's coming. If there's a series of large projects coming, the sooner we can tell them about it and give them an understanding of what the next decade or so holds, the more comfort they're going to develop around the offerings when when the big bond offerings come and we're requesting ratings on individual bonds. To Mike Barkley's point, they expect us to be investing. They expect us to be doing large capital replacement and or renovation projects. If we're not doing that, that means we're fundamentally running down our asset base, and at some point it will create a crisis unto itself. So it's actually a healthy thing to be spending money in a thoughtful, constructive way to keep our asset base healthy. But the reality is we really haven't done that in the past 20 years. I mean, we had a debt and financial crisis, in the first decade, and we've basically been paying down debt for the second decade of this century. Only now are we starting to pivot to the thought and honestly the capacity to contemplate large projects, several large projects going forward. So in a way, this is a change of behavior for our town. You don't want to catch the analysts, the rating agencies off guard. You want to tell them that's coming. You want to tell them what's coming over the next 2 decades. But what's coming is fundamentally healthy, provided we manage it thoughtfully. I think those are sort of the highlights of what we've pulled together so far, and the thoughts and comments that we'd share at this moment. It's just early days in terms of pulling the data and starting the analysis.
Mike, you have Brian hit all the high points, and we had discussed earlier in this group a topic that we spent a fair amount of time on, the three of us, which was the inputs to the bond rating and the meaning of the bond rating. It's not just, we're not just a cargo cult that worships a bond rating. A bond rating has even more so than the spread in interest rates on an issuance is in the worst case is access to credit at all, which we thought, I think the three of us all shared the same opinion that was of the first importance. But Mike, did you have things to add? Where'd he go?
Where'd he go?
Oh gosh.
Smart man. I mean,
that's an approach that I've used in the past. Sorry, Your Honor, can we take a 5-minute break? I think that's where we're at. I think when we get the material that we've asked for, and start to plug things into a model, we'll be able to have more to say about what this stuff is going to mean in terms of debt load and the realistic limits on it. So I think that's where we're at.
so do you have any idea when you're likely to be able to fill in some of those blanks, at least partially?
Well, 2 things. One is no. We're waiting for people to get us stuff and information. We're waiting on the input from a town employee who has not yet started work.
Okay.
And second, this isn't this isn't a sort of a process that's going to benefit by rushing. Not that we're going to dawdle, but maybe the next time we get together, we can give you some sort of a projection on time, but I don't feel comfortable doing that now,
Okay, okay.
unless my colleagues dissent.
Well, Mike has come back.
Yeah,
Mark.
sorry about that. Right as you called on me, Rob, I guess FiOS kicked out. So I don't know what, I mean, I think Brian encapsulated everything I would have said about, what we have so far. And we do need data. We need to understand what the current debt schedule looks like, and putting a timeline on that is, as soon as we can get the information, we'll try to pass it on and have better answers.
Okay, well, I think that's getting some good progress. And I think it is important to understand that when you start losing your credit rating, it's not just that, but then everything else you do becomes progressively more expensive. And that is funny. It cascades a lot faster than you would think. So we need to be careful of that. I do think that we probably have been a benefit because we have been prudent in the past, so we're no imminent. I think we have the capacity to do a lot of things, but I think we have to manage it very prudently. By the way, it is 8:30, and one of the things I think we want to have is none of these meetings should go more than 2 hours, and we should care and feeding of people on committees to keep them on committees. Mike, Dick.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
I have a report to give as well. So let me
All right.
let me do that as part of this section. I met with Michelle Leary and Chris Senior, and we discussed quite a few things. We discussed options to put more money, or how we put money into the Capital Stabilization Fund, looking to find ways to create better support for a lot of the capital requests. We discussed the whole process of funding capital projects, including CPC, state funds and grants, for example, the Seaport Economic Council, and then third-party funding for programs like Safe Harbor or some equipment or major infrastructure projects like sewer plants. There's third-party funding available there. It can take pressure off the town's capital expenses. We talked about increasing the roads and capital items maintenance annual budgets. And we'll have more information on that, but just FYI for everybody, our annual road maintenance program is underfunded, severely underfunded. It averages 300,000 per year. It should be closer to 1 million per year. We also talked about adding depreciation line items so that we are actually putting money aside for future purchases. And that annual maintenance programs for buildings will add years to the useful life, and will reduce the need for new buildings. We talked a lot about revenue and the definition of new revenue, definition of new growth. We also talked about revenue increases or enhancements, including new user fees, perhaps paid parking is an option, and other items, other ideas are on my list. One thing I want to go back to on adding money to the Capital Stabilization Fund, a lot of that money comes from things that Chris called accelerators, which are specific non-property tax revenues to match up with specific capital needs, so that ambulance fees might be used towards public safety. We can be looking at other accelerators for specific uses. So that's my story. There's plenty of detail here, but I wanted to just give you the highlights. Any questions, though? All right.
Thank you, Mike. That's very, very helpful. And if you could distribute that, and Jean has her hand up, but maybe if you distribute that whole report to everybody.
So new growth is definitely something that the town uses to fund our operations, both on the school and town side. And for years, we've had some pretty good new growth in light of development. We have probably, I think it's projected 1 to 2 years of future good new growth in light of pending projects that we have out there. And I know Chris Flex is here on the planning board. And so we continue to keep our eye on projects out there, but I do think that, and this goes back to a meeting I had with Don way back when he was here, he did do projections of new growth. And new growth is headed like this in terms of the projections into the future. And so we are potentially, I don't want to say losing a revenue source, but our revenue source is declining over time in light of the fact that we may have peaked in terms of developments that are out there and the new growth that we're sort of used to getting from the zoning, the new buildings that are coming in. And so, and Mike, I know that, I'm not sure if you talked with Chris about, and Chris, I don't know if Chris is on here, but I know Don at one point had forward-looking projections as to new growth. I was wondering if you had sort of delved into that, because fortunately or unfortunately, that has been a place that we've been using to sort of fund our increases in, for example, wages year after year. And so that might be a place we need to consider as well, setting aside, anything other than just the data projections, setting aside formulas or anything like that, just the sheer fact of whether we're going to have the new growth that we've frankly become used to. Probably something we need to just be mindful of.
Just to answer your question, Michelle, Chris and I did not speak
Okay.
specifically about projections for new growth, although Chris has provided all of us, and it's on our joint website, the past reports on new growth. But that's something we can certainly take up and add that as another data point that we want to consider. It's an important driver for this formula that we're trying to come up with on affording these major projects.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay, do we have other comments or? Okay, couple of things. Let's have a do on certain things, meeting together is very positive. On certain things, it means that everybody has to be in a certain place, and that can be difficult, especially for those who have jobs that may require late hours, traveling, et cetera, and so on. So Zoom creates a much easier time to have a quorum, and it's a little bit easier. It also makes it much easier for people to really see what we are saying. And if there are documents, they can be seen. On the other hand, there's a lot to be said for meeting in person across the table. My sense is on some meetings we'll do one way and some meetings we'll do another. But I just thought we might take 5 minutes and just kind of kick that around a little bit. So comments? Well, I guess we don't take 5 minutes and kick that around, Jean.
I do prefer in person. I think our last few meetings have been productive in person. I am mindful that it is harder to get people together, and quite candidly, we are struggling to get effective technology in place such that everyone who wants to hear from afar, including on TV, can absolutely have that option. But I think if we can have it in person, so long as we can still maintain a quorum, I think we should try to do that and work on fixing the technology issues, or making sure that those viewing from afar are able to hear what we're doing.
Yeah, no, just a little background. I have been asking for a solution to the technological issue and how to do that. I don't think it's that difficult, but evidently some of our buildings are not receptive to that. They have bad echo problems, and I'm not quite sure, but anyway, what do people think about in-person versus Zoom?
The group is
Largely
welcome to,
indifferent.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The group is welcome to meet at the Learning Commons in the school too. I mean, the school committee has set up where it's hybrid, right? So if people want to join by Zoom, they can join by Zoom. If they want to come in person, they can come in person. We have a device there that allows that. You can hear fine, and it's a good space. I mean, I'm sure that I could make that work. We just have to, get someone that can help us set it up, which we do for the school committee meetings. I just can't involve Pat Sullivan. It's not fair to him to be involved for any meetings other than the school committee meetings, but I'm happy to try and figure that out if you'd like. I mean, we did it at Wilcott as well. So I thought that we had the ability to do it there, but if you're telling me that the last meeting we weren't able to do that, where people could have joined it, because I know the first meeting I attended with when Mr. Dick was running the meeting, we were at Wilcott, and there's just the school committee met there at some point in time where we were able to have hybrid meetings as well. So I feel like either of those two spaces would allow us to do that, but it's up to, I'm not in charge.
Well, thank you, Craig, and we'll probably take you up on that, and maybe you and I should talk sometime about that. When that hybrid meeting, a lot of people at home could not hear and see clearly. Now the participants could, but the people at home couldn't. But I think it's a technological, but just do people like the idea of meeting in person, or do you like the idea of meeting in Zoom? Just personal preference. Lance.
I guess I'll jump in. I do very much like Zoom meetings, but I do agree with Ms. Dibble that the in-person meetings tend to be more productive. So I would propose that, if we have information gathering meetings or discussion meetings, that maybe those could be held in Zoom if necessary, but to the extent we're making any decisions on formal recommendations, we do that in person if at all possible.
Well, I kind of tend to agree, but let's see, who else?
I would agree with in person.
Okay, Bill, Mike, Barclay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Gene said. In person is more effective, but any way we can open it up for broader participation, I think is always a good thing too.
So a data intensive meeting might be better on Zoom, but we want to tilt towards in person. Okay.
Jack,
So
how often is the group meeting?
I don't know. That's the next thing. How often do you think we should be meeting? Every 2 weeks, weekly, once a month? I think it's got to be. Gene?
I think at least once a month, maybe twice, depending on how things are going, particularly if we're trending towards town meeting and need to accelerate our pace. But we also need to wait for our finance director to start. So I think that the next meeting, probably there'll be a gap in time as we await more data and next steps.
Okay. So my sense is that Mike Dick in person.
Yes, I agree with all that's been said so far. Yes. I'm
Okay.
also curious to hear from either Mark Cameron or Corey Evans, who are both on as attendees, on how this experience was for them and whether they might actually attend a live meeting in person. So I know Corey's a member of the select board, but we're not asking for his opinion on any of the work in front of us. It's asking his opinion on how this was for him as someone who is tuned in. And then Mark Cameron, of course. We'd like to hear from you, or I would anyway.
Corey, are you there? Mark, are you there?
This is Mark. Yeah, as long as I would say, as long as the public can tune in and effectively hear it, I think that's important. So, you know, I respect the in-person for the working group and the actual committee members, but for the general public to be able to tune in, as long as that's done with good audio, I would support that hybrid.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty clear consensus. Okay, I don't see Corey out there. If he shows up, he can show up.
He's on the attendees.
I know, but I don't know why he hasn't, and I'm not controlling that switchboard. So,
I mean, Mr. Creighton, like you said, I think it's a pretty clear consensus anyway, right?
yeah, I think
we can
it's
probably,
pretty clear. There's no, I think we all agree on that. And if we do run into something that's very data intensive, we might go to Zoom. Aside from that, our default is in-person meetings. Is that, everybody agree to that? Okay, all right.
Jack, the only other thing that I'd throw out there is keeping the option open. Depending on who we're talking about, there may be family commitments that prevent us, and it might be good to have the call-in option as a fallback, but I agree with the preference for in-person.
Yeah, and I do want to have that as an option, so we can always come in with Zoom. And I know it's possible. I've been a big advocate, but it just doesn't seem to happen. But yes, I think it's very important that individual members who can't make, we need to have some accommodation. Now, it is possible to call in by phone. That has been done in the past for years, where that person just can speak on the phone. But I'm sure that we can figure something that would work. And Craig, if you guys can figure it out at the school, or I quite honestly, I'm a little frustrated we haven't been able to do it, because I think it's easily doable. But that's
we've been doing it for over a year.
I know. I just had a lot of complaints about the quality from people in the community. That's so. But if it's what we want to do, and that's how we'll do it. So, okay, do people, well, I think for the next meeting date, we really ought to wait till the finance director, unless somebody wants to meet 2 weeks from now. Okay. And, then we're going to, for now, it's kind of, we have 2 new members coming on officially tomorrow night or shortly thereafter. And after that, I think we should decide how we want to structure it as for having a chair. In the meantime, if Mike is willing to continue on his work for a little bit, that would be very helpful. Is that okay, Mike? Yeah.
What specifically
Yeah,
you're asking me?
Continue what you're doing, to just kind of as moderating, control, seeing the information.
Well, I think you've taken the lead here, and I would encourage you to do so. I put together a number of different approaches here. So I'm not quite sure what it is that you would actually need from me going
Okay.
forward.
Well, why don't we talk offline? Because this is a selectmen's committee, I've been, officially chairing, because we kind of have to. Down the line, I think we're going to have a little bit different structure, and we'll be discussing that at our next meeting when we have the 2 other people who are coming on, and then we can revisit that. I'm just talking about the interim. But we'll talk tomorrow morning and work something out, Mike. because you've done a very good job and it's made it very possible for all of us to do all this. So, do we have any other comments? Brian?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand the status of the committee and the committee members. So have the various people on this call right now been formally appointed?
Yes,
Yes,
well, with a few exceptions.
yeah.
Bill and
And
Chris,
they will be appointed tomorrow, is that correct?
Bill and
Bill-
Chris are on the agenda for tomorrow.
Okay, so I assume that we all have to go swear in for the committee? And sign on in some way, or we just, it's done? Is there anything that needs to take place for us to formalize our participation in this committee so that when we next meet, we actually have a committee with committee members?
Yeah,
I'll have to double check on that because we started off as kind of an informal discussion group.
Right,
And then we were running as open meeting,
right.
and then if we have to, and we're trying to formalize that, we're bringing people on as an advisory, not like advisory committee. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll check with town council. We've had some.
I just want to make sure that whatever formal step a committee member needs to take in order to formalize their participation on the committee, that step happens before we start making any votes on, on anything, including organization of the committee and its leadership.
No, we will do that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Jane?
yeah, so Brian, once we get the full committee constituted tomorrow, hopefully we can send around an email about that as well.
That'd be great.
Also looking for a mutually convenient time for everyone. Maybe a few weeks out from now, once the finance director has come in. And then I think in the interim, one thing that we can begin thinking about as a committee is, in addition to the fact gathering on the needs, as we've been alluding to, maybe having a bigger, more prepared discussion on the revenue sources, that we may want to think about the other side of the ledger with respect to different opportunities that may be out there, including we can drill down on the suggestion about the consultant and ask Michelle and Chris to weigh in on that point. And so I would suggest maybe the next meeting, we start moving in terms of just a general discussion on those topics. And we can provide some background info there, if that makes sense, because that was something on the agenda we meant to get to today, but we didn't have enough time.
Okay, any other comments? Seeing as how we're not, do we really need a motion to adjourn? I guess, but
Let's do it just in case.
let's just do it in case.
So moved.
So moved.
Second,
Roll call vote.
Brian Host, aye.
Mike Barclay,
Hand
aye.
down now.
Jean Haley Dippledy.
Lance Dial, aye.
Yeah,
Chris Pratt, aye.
Craig McClellan, aye.
Rob Hillman abstains. I'm on the advisory committee. I can't vote on this committee.
that's right. That's right. That's another little, okay. So,
So I have to change mine to an abstain as well. Right?
abstain.
Sorry, Mike. I tried to get in there before you, but.
Yeah. Mike, Scott has to stop hanging out with all these lawyers. They know all this stuff.
It's just pettifogging.
Wow. And Mike Dick?
Aye.
Okay. All right, we are adjourned.